The artificial intelligence boom is creating one of the largest infrastructure building programs in modern American history. Technology companies such as OpenAI, Anthropic, and Elon Musk's xAI are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on data centers. The enormous buildings containing the computers that run services such as ChatGPT, Gemini, cloud storage, and online streaming. Governors often welcome these projects as major investments. Developers promise construction jobs, new tax revenue, and a place in America's rapidly growing AI economy. But when the proposed location is announced, the reaction from people living nearby is often very different. Across the United States, residents are organizing petitions, attending planning meetings, and demanding that projects be delayed or canceled. New York imposed a one-year moratorium on large new data centers in July 2026. Residents of Monterey Park, California, voted to ban them permanently, while dozens of towns and counties have introduced their own temporary pauses or stricter zoning rules. At least 100 American localities have now approved some form of data center moratorium. A moratorium is not necessarily a permanent ban. It is usually a temporary pause intended to give officials time to study the consequences and write new rules before more projects are approved. But the scale of the opposition is striking. A Gallup survey published in May 2026 found that 7 out of 10 Americans would oppose an AI data center being built in their local area. Almost half said they would strongly oppose it. So why have buildings that power ordinary internet services suddenly become more unpopular than some power plants? The answer begins with what modern data centers have become. A traditional data center may operate websites, store photographs, or process financial transactions. An AI data center performs far more demanding calculations using specialized computer chips known as GPUs. GPU stands for Graphics Processing Unit. These chips were originally developed to produce video game graphics, but their ability to perform billions of calculations simultaneously also makes them extremely useful for artificial intelligence. Thousands of these processors may operate together inside one facility. They consume electricity continuously, produce enormous quantities of heat, and require industrial cooling systems to prevent them from overheating. This means a new AI data center is not simply another office building. It is closer to a large industrial facility with the electricity requirements of a power-intensive factory, the cooling requirements of a power station, and the physical appearance of several enormous warehouses placed beside each other. The first major concern is electricity. A conventional data center may require between 10 and 25 megawatts of power. A hyperscale AI facility can exceed 100 megawatts, and some proposed campuses may eventually require several gigawatts. A facility using 100 megawatts continuously can draw roughly as much electricity as around 100,000 homes. American data centers consumed approximately 4.4% of the country's electricity in 2023. The U.S. Department of Energy estimates that their share could rise to between 6.7 and 12% by 2028. That electricity must come from somewhere. A local utility may need to build new power plants, substations, and transmission lines to serve the facility. A substation is the equipment that changes electricity from one voltage to another, so it can move safely between the power grid and the customer. These projects can cost billions of dollars. Residents therefore ask a simple question: who will pay for them? Utilities normally recover the cost of infrastructure through electricity rates. If the data center company signs a long-term contract and pays the full cost of the upgrades it requires, households may be protected. But if the company receives discounted rates, leaves before the infrastructure has been paid for, or uses less electricity than it originally promised, some of those costs could be transferred to other customers. This is why several states are creating special electricity rate categories for data centers. The purpose is to stop the cost of connecting one extremely large customer from appearing later in everybody else's monthly bill. Microsoft has even promised to pay utility rates high enough to cover the power infrastructure required by its American data centers. Its president acknowledged that asking the public to subsidize the electricity costs of highly profitable technology companies would be politically unrealistic. The concern is not merely price. Electric grids must remain balanced every second. Electricity production has to match demand, and enough backup capacity must exist for heat waves, equipment failures, and other emergencies. A single data center campus can request as much electricity as an entire small state normally consumes. Building new power stations and transmission lines can take years, while technology companies often want their servers operating much sooner. Communities worry that this race for electricity could delay the connection of new homes, factories, or clean energy projects. Ireland previously restricted new data center connections around Dublin after officials warned that the facilities were placing too much pressure on the grid. Denmark has proposed giving data centers lower priority than households, hospitals, transport, and ordinary industry when new grid connections are allocated. The second concern is water. Computer chips convert almost all the electricity they use into heat. That heat has to be removed continuously. Many data centers use cooling towers, where a portion of water is evaporated to carry heat into the atmosphere. Once that water evaporates, it is no longer immediately available to the local water system. A medium-sized facility may use hundreds of thousands of gallons each day. A particularly large facility using evaporative cooling can consume several million gallons daily, an amount comparable to the water used by a small town. But this comparison needs qualification. Not every data center uses the same amount. Water consumption depends on the cooling system, local climate, workload, and season. Closed-loop liquid cooling can reuse the same fluid repeatedly, while dry cooling can release heat without evaporating much water at all. The problem is that the highest water demand can occur during the hottest days of the year, when residents, farms, and other businesses also need the most water. That creates a capacity problem. A town may have enough water for its current population on an average day, but not enough pipeline, treatment, or pumping capacity to supply an enormous industrial customer during a heat wave. The issue becomes more serious when groundwater is involved. Groundwater is water stored beneath the surface in layers of rock and sediment called aquifers. If water is removed from an aquifer faster than rain and natural processes replenish it, wells can decline and the ground itself may eventually sink. A Virginia government study released in July 2026 warned that the state's eastern groundwater supply was already constrained. It concluded that under current conditions, a new data center using evaporative cooling would probably struggle to find a reliable and sustainable groundwater supply anywhere in the region. Residents are also frustrated by the lack of public information. Companies may announce that a facility will use highly efficient cooling without publishing its expected water consumption during the hottest day of the year. The average annual figure may appear manageable, while the peak daily requirement is what determines whether the local water system can actually cope. Then there is noise. From the outside, a data center looks like an unusually dull warehouse. Inside and around it, however, thousands of fans, pumps, chillers, and transformers may operate 24 hours a day. Cooling equipment pushes enormous quantities of air through the facility. Transformers produce a steady electrical hum. Backup generators are tested regularly and can become extremely loud when operating. The result is not always the dramatic roar associated with an airport or factory. It can be a constant low-frequency humming or pulsing sound that travels farther than expected and becomes particularly noticeable at night. Residents near data centers in Virginia have reported disturbed sleep, headaches, and a lower quality of life. Backup diesel generators can produce sound levels comparable to motorcycles or heavy construction equipment when measured close to the source. A data center can technically obey an existing noise ordinance and still create a serious nuisance. Many local noise rules were written for businesses that close at night or produce irregular bursts of sound. They were not designed for hundreds of industrial cooling fans operating continuously. Cities are therefore considering larger distances between data centers and homes, known as setbacks, along with sound walls, enclosed cooling equipment, and continuous noise monitoring. Construction itself can last for years. A hyperscale campus is often built in stages, meaning that one building may begin operating while construction continues next door. Residents may experience heavy trucks, dust, road closures, floodlights, and pile driving long before the facility provides any economic benefit. The fourth concern is air pollution. Data centers require backup power because even a brief outage can interrupt important computing jobs. Most facilities maintain rows of diesel generators that can start when the grid fails. These generators may operate only during emergencies and testing, but diesel exhaust contains nitrogen oxides and fine particles associated with respiratory and cardiovascular illness. Some AI companies are going further and installing natural gas turbines to provide ordinary electricity on-site because the existing grid cannot connect them quickly enough. The most controversial example is xAI's Colossus project near Memphis. Residents and environmental groups have challenged the use of dozens of gas turbines, arguing that the equipment worsens air pollution in nearby communities that already experience high rates of respiratory illness. This is especially sensitive because large industrial projects are often placed near lower-income neighborhoods where land is cheaper, and political resistance may historically have received less attention. Cities are therefore being asked not just whether a data center creates pollution, but who will be forced to live beside it. Land use creates another conflict. Data center campuses can occupy hundreds or even thousands of acres. They are frequently built near high-voltage power lines, which often means rural land on the edge of expanding cities. Developers may offer farmers and landowners prices far above the agricultural value of the property. But neighboring residents see productive farmland, woodland, and open space being replaced by windowless buildings, transmission lines, and electrical substations. The average American data center site in 2024 covered approximately 224 acres, while the largest proposed campuses can exceed 1,000 acres. In Saline Township, Michigan, residents opposed a proposed 250-acre Stargate data center over concerns involving farmland, groundwater, electricity costs, and the community's rural character. The township initially refused to change the zoning rules needed for the development. The developers sued, and officials eventually reached a settlement allowing construction to proceed with restrictions on water and noise and approximately $14 million in community benefits. Zoning determines what types of buildings and activities are allowed on a particular piece of land. A rezoning decision can convert farmland or residential property into an industrial site. For local residents, that decision is permanent. Even if the technology company changes its strategy later, the farmland and landscape may never return. Supporters argue that these sacrifices are justified because data centers create jobs and tax revenue. During construction, that can be true. A large campus may employ thousands of electricians, engineers, equipment operators, and building workers. But once construction ends, data centers are heavily automated. Most of the buildings are occupied by computers rather than employees. The Saline project's developers say it will support more than 2,500 union construction jobs and over 450 permanent jobs. That is meaningful employment, but relatively modest for a project valued at $16 billion and covering hundreds of acres. Cities may also offer sales tax or property tax exemptions to attract these facilities. These incentives can reduce the public revenue that supposedly justifies accepting the project in the first place. Data centers can still contribute substantial taxes. But residents increasingly want officials to calculate the net benefit after subtracting tax breaks, road construction, emergency services, grid upgrades, and environmental costs. This is why the opposition is becoming politically powerful. The benefits of a data center are broad and distant. Millions of people may receive better AI tools, cloud services, and online infrastructure. The costs are intensely local. One community supplies the land, one utility supplies the power, one water system provides the cooling water, and one group of residents hears the fans every night. That does not mean every proposed data center should be rejected. Facilities can use closed-loop cooling, reclaimed wastewater, and cleaner backup systems. Companies can pay the full cost of their electricity connections, publish expected water consumption, avoid prime farmland, and place noisy equipment farther from homes. Local governments can require community benefit agreements, which are legally enforceable commitments to provide funding, infrastructure, or environmental protections in exchange for approval. The current backlash is therefore not simply a population refusing technological progress, it is a demand for rules. For years, data centers were treated as harmless commercial buildings. The AI boom has transformed them into some of the largest new industrial customers in the world, but many planning laws, water systems, and electricity regulations have not caught up. Cities are pressing pause because they are being asked to approve facilities whose resource requirements may exceed anything they have previously encountered. The cloud may appear weightless and invisible, but every cloud service has a physical address, and the people living beside that address increasingly want to know who receives the benefits, who carries the costs, and why they should agree before those questions have been answered.